So hello and welcome everybody to a special edition of the Quantum Compass. My name is Davyd Farrell and I'm joined by my partner, the one and only
Bella Alvaran. Hi, welcome back.
All right, so this is a special episode of the Quantum Compass, as we've been sharing with all of you, our wonderful brothers and sisters in our audience over the last few weeks. We've been reassessing which type of astrological system we're using. And that line of research has led us into a whole bunch of stuff that we've been sharing with you all on the Quantum Compass over the last few episodes. And as part of that research, it also led us to today's special guest. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest for today, the one and only Athen Chimenti. How are you, brother?
Oh, not too bad. But thanks so much for having me on. It's great to be here.
Right. So Athen has been an astrologer with the Sidereal system for around about 12 years and runs the Mastering the Zodiac website and platform. And of course, we'll be talking to him later in today's show about the services that maybe he can offer to all of you out there if you're interested to do so. But where are we going to start today, Bella, in this special interview?
First of all, I'd like to say I'm super excited. I've been looking forward to the interview for a couple of weeks because it's one of the topics that came up after I finished the navigation guide to quantum consciousness. When I arrived to chapter 13 and realized the whole deal with Ophiuchus, I mean, it was always in my awareness, but then we had a nice conversation with our Ascended Master Guide, and he said that it is very important to include the serpents, the 13th sign, and that it would add another dimension to the whole astrological concept and knowledge. So I looked into different websites and you kept on coming up. So I don't think many people are doing 13 sign sidereal astrology. So I'm super excited to talk to you. And how about we start with a little bio of who is Athen? How long have you been doing this? How did you get to do this astrology?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually wasn't into astrology or metaphysical stuff for the vast majority of my life. Always considered myself more kind of left brain or like modern day scientific, where you had to really like verify things with me. I had to see it with my five senses. And if I couldn't verify with my five senses, it wasn't real. So I was always into personal development though. And I think that's really the blessing is that eventually led me to like meditation and a little bit of like that kind of personal development. I did start meditating quite a bit. I kind of removed myself from society there for a little bit. I was living in a homestead just outside of Las Vegas in Death Valley and really diving deep within myself, just meditating a lot, having a lot of peace and that tranquility. And in that space, I started to become aware of, there's much more to life than what the five senses can perceive. Started opening my mind to other possibilities, had what you might call a spiritual awakening. And that eventually, of course, led me to things like astrology. I mean, I was getting into all kinds of metaphysical, esoteric kind of stuff, but astrology really spoke to me because it does appeal to that left side of the brain. Because I'm still that person where I like to see things visually. I like to be able to apply it practically in life. And astrology to me really speaks to being able to do that. So I started doing it for myself, started doing it for friends, started a YouTube channel at the heydays of YouTube where you could upload a video and instantly get like 10,000 views or whatever. So I was very fortunate to have that platform, but it was through YouTube that I started gaining a following, started to share this and started to do readings professionally. So here we are 12 years later. Now I'm very fortunate to be able to do this full-time professionally.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And so following that, why did you choose the sidereal astrology compared to the other one? What called you to it? How was that decision? Or did you start with one and then transitioned?
Yeah, I started with tropical, like most astrologers. I mean, I did know about sidereal, as most do, but it wasn't, like so many things in life, we kind of know knowledge, we kind of know like in our heads, but it doesn't really become a thing until it becomes experiential. And that's what happened to me. So I was doing tropical. I knew about sidereal, but one day, it was right around the time these apps started coming out where you could hold your smartphone up to the sky and see like,
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
And
I
wanted to see, I wanted to see where the full moon was. So I'm like, still in my little tropical bubble. I knew about sidereal, but I'm like, hey, let me just, not thinking about it, let me go check this full moon that's supposed to be in Gemini. So sure enough, I hold it up and it's right smack in the middle of Taurus. So that's when it really hit me, was this really experiential visualization, and then me starting to really question like what I was doing there, with tropical. And so that slowly segued into regular sidereal, and then like you guys into 13th sign sidereal, and that's what I use today, because outside of it being very accurate, in my opinion, it is what we see visually, and it is what our ancestors intended for us to use when they did choose these particular constellations.
Right. So one of the things that I want to achieve with this conversation is to give people tips on how to transition, or how to at least be able to go and look into it and start doing that research and comparison. Because what I understand is that they both work, but you're looking at different dimensional points. So I'd like maybe if you can give people some tips. Okay, if you're already doing this, how about you do this and then compare? And
well, and maybe if I could just add something there, Apple, which is, I guess, the point of the conversation that we're at, and a lot of our own audiences at, is can we use both? And the question that everybody was asking this is like, why are we using something that literally doesn't match in the sky? Which many of us would think as above, so below, and yet that doesn't seem to be the case. And yet there is still a lot of things in tropical astrology that works. And our natural inclination at this point is that both systems can work, but somehow tell us different information. But we'd love to hear your view and to share with us how you transition between the two, and in fact whether you still use tropical astrology for anything at all. So yeah, we'd love to hear you share.
Yeah. So I'm like you guys. I still find tropical accurate. I still find all the other forms of astrology accurate, especially Vedic astrology is extremely accurate. And I view it the same way too, in the sense that the way I see it is that, we can look at anything in life from a infinite number of perspectives, or dimensions, whatever, but we can look at the same thing from a multitude of different perspectives. And no matter what angle we're looking at the thing, the truth is in there from that perspective. And it's also true that the more perspectives we have, I think, is the better. But again, it's all a matter of like what's resonating for the person. So for me personally, I do prefer simplicity. I'm a very minimalistic kind of a person. So for me, I like to use true sidereal and just leave it at that. But there's plenty in the community who do use tropical still use other, the mainstream forms of sidereal, the even 30 degrees forms of sidereal. And I still find them all to be still very accurate. What I think we're dealing with in this sense is that I do believe that true sidereal, being the actual sky in which astrology was derived from, I do see that as the fundamental self in the chart, or the fundamental astrology, if you will. Within that, you can create charts of charts. We do this in astrology all the time, right? You might call it a derivative chart. We create these derivatives. For example, like the progressed chart is a derivative chart from the original chart, even though it's not something we see visually at the moment or during birth. And that doesn't take away from its accuracy. Derivative charts are still extremely accurate. It's just that it's important to recognize that they are derived from the original, and then we're starting to look at it from that particular perspective. Okay. And so what I think we're looking at from the tropical perspective, first of all, is since tropical is based around the seasons. So for those that don't know, basically tropical is you take the zodiac and you overlay it on top of the seasons. And you say, okay, in this seasonal system, where are the planets? Okay. Now it's still using the cycle of life, which astrology shows us through the zodiac, and it's still using a cyclical system, which is the seasons. And so it's still solid in its application, of course, but it's looking at it through a seasonal lens. And if we think about what the seasonal lens is, I like to think of it as kind of the same way the maybe Hindu astrologers would have looked at it, which is that, the seasons are fixed. Like no matter what, we go through this repeating cycle, and it repeats very much so. It doesn't deviate from that cycle. And so this is very symbolic for what you might call the sort of wheel of life, or the wheel of karma, as the Hindus might say, the very physical 3D dimensional experience that we're having. So what I think the tropical chart is showing is the physical self, the more physical self. And that's why you can see, like you guys are saying, a tremendous accuracy with things like the tropical ascendant, very much shows the persona of the person. Like, for example, I'm a Gemini rising in tropical, and I talk a lot. I use my hands a lot to talk. You know what I mean? Like you can see the Gemini, I think. And so it's still very accurate in terms of the physical characteristics. Now in true sidereal, for example, I'm a Taurus. Now you're not going to see that physically in me, I don't think, right? But in my experience, the Taurus is very personal, and the ascendant becomes extremely personal to the individual, because what the ascendant is in true sidereal is more of what life is helping the person develop. And we could say that since it's the fundamental chart, that it is, in my opinion, more fundamental, maybe more spiritual. Some see it as more of the spiritual self in terms of the growth and evolution. So again, it's all just looking at the self from different angles. And I think that's how I like to look at it. Is true sidereal is more of the spiritual or fundamental essence of what's growing in the soul in this experience. And then you've got something like tropical, which is definitely more of the physical experiences and is still extremely accurate in terms of being able to see and predict these more physical karmic experiences that we have, you know, in this physical world.
I love that comparison because it feels like it is the connection to our inner dimension or to our soul. A much more deeper kind of sense of
Yeah, I mean, one of the things is you're talking, Athen, that's occurring to me again, and perhaps is kind of behind our investigation, is when we look at the stars in the sky, or we even work with a particular system of fixed star cosmology, it seems to speak more of our soul's journey through the cosmos, through other star systems. And our intuition is that the sidereal 13 sign system is going to give more about that. But what we can say from working with tropical for many years is that, yes, it seems to be more about the physical persona, but for me personally, it also helps me navigate the mundane world. It gives me the opportunity to feel into the energies that may be coming into the third dimensional world, and to see how they fit with my more astral journeys. I tend to meditate a lot too, and journey into other dimensions and feel energies that are coming towards us. And I found that tropical astrology helps me to put a face or a coloration to the energies or impulses that I feel coming towards us. It doesn't mean that it's always accurate, but I found that it actually, by and large, it generally is. However, as we said at the beginning, sometimes there are things that don't quite seem to fit, which is why we've had these question marks. So would you think that's an accurate way of describing this? Would you agree with that, or would you have a different take?
Yeah. No, I mean, that's exactly what I'm saying, just in different words. I mean, it's the more mundane, the more physical, and even the more collective, which I think you're alluding to too.
Yes.
The fact that so many people are using tropical in the world today also speaks to what's going on in the collective unconscious and what we end up experiencing, you know, more collectively in the world.
I like that take.
Yeah, in fact, that's a really good point. And do you think that perhaps because there's a much more collective energy working with tropical astrology, that's actually partly what holds it up as a collective experience, because it has so much intention behind it and has had for several thousand years, even though perhaps it doesn't match what's in the sky? This is also a question that we've been asking ourselves.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's like the journey that we're all on, right? Like every one of these tools is serving a specific use case for a specific time in someone's life, right? And so I do believe that, you know, there's a reason why the vast majority of the West is using tropical. It's specific to the West in that it is a more sort of yang type of philosophy, whereas like in the East with Hindu, it's more yin, more spiritual. So it works for the West. And the fact that so many people are using it is either synchronistic or a direct cause and effect of the fact that, yeah, this is a system that is both needed for the collective, and every individual that's using it is contributing, you know, to that whole collective experience. Yeah.
Well, the way I'm feeling this situation is that we're about to transition into what the more sidereal. As we evolve, as we shift, as new Earth is approaching, we need to start looking also at the stars and be connected directly to what's going on. So we have both perspectives. And so it was pretty difficult to find other softwares that work with sidereal astrology. I wanted to ask you, why aren't there too many options, and which ones do you know of? Which ones do you recommend?
Especially with the 13 signs, there are other systems sidereal. We know you know there are many of those, in fact, that you can program into different websites, but there really aren't. I think there's only the one that you're using that we could find, in fact. And do you think that's a mark of of the fact that we're still in a transition phase, perhaps to understanding a different type of astrology, or even remembering a different type of astrology, perhaps, and that's a reflective of the interest at this moment in time? Or do you have a different view?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. There is, by the way, one more software that is more recent. It's called just Astrology app. It's very new. I haven't used it personally, but I do want to mention that to your audience, just in case, because luckily now we kind of have a little more options, and I think we're getting more options too in the future.
And
But
the
right
other
now it's
one is called
Prometheus. Yeah,
Prometheus.
Prometheus.
Yes, so
Yeah, so that's the one I
so there
use.
are only two that we are aware of so far. And
Yeah.
there I wanted to go into Ophiuchus.
Mm.
So because there is a lot of mythology there, and I talked about this in one of the shows where, you know, the Stellar Nations, which is a whole mythology and chronicles of the galaxy, which works with fixed stars created by these two ladies in Hungary, Bea and Nico. They go into the whole idea of Ophiuchus not being a male, but the goddess riding the serpent, and being in direct contact with the center of the galaxy. So I think it's a very interesting take on that. And then we talked about like the traditional Ophiuchus story, which probably you're more familiar with, which is everything to do with from Greek mythology, and then the Sumerian one as well. But then there is this take that we had from Zach, where he said, well, don't worry about Ophiuchus. Make sure you include the serpent.
Mm.
So the serpent's constellation is the one that wants to be here highlighted, and we need to integrate it. So what is your take on the whole Ophiuchus? How do you connect to it? What can you tell us about Ophiuchus and your connection?
Yeah, so for me, it's always about seeing the patterns and the associations with the rest of the zodiac, because there's a very clear, as you know, pattern in the zodiac. So if we can understand the zodiac itself, we can understand all the other parts of it, such as through the elements and modalities and things like this. So when we're talking about Ophiuchus, it's very important to also include Orion, because Orion sits completely opposite of Ophiuchus, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, Ophiuchus is the center of the Milky Way. So it's where we have the Milky Way, the center of the galaxy, right at the end of Ophiuchus. And we know that that part of the sky is Scorpio is part of the sky too, right? So the 8th house, because if you look at Ophiuchus, and this is perhaps one of the reasons it was removed, but it does share exactly the same sky as Scorpio. So Scorpio is down here below the ecliptic, and Ophiuchus is literally standing almost parallel, completely on top of Scorpio, right? So, so that part of the sky is water and fixed. We know that because of the Scorpio energy. Water is feminine, okay, and fixed is more of how the energy is expressed. But in this example, yes, I would agree that Ophiuchus is the feminine of polarity. So every time, like I said, there's a pattern in the zodiac. So there's always an opposition and there's always a polarity. And so the polarity to Ophiuchus is Orion. Now, Orion is very, very much the more masculine archetype here. It's the hunter, and it's Cyrus. It's always been associated with that. And the serpent in ancient history has always been associated with feminine energy. So it definitely is a very important distinction, because now we know how to work with the energies in very different ways. Basically, what we understand is that Orion, being the part of the sky that is moving away from the center of the galaxy, represents the creation. So in this sort of pattern, if we think of the oldest part of the galaxy would be towards the center. Center of the galaxy is a black hole that's kind of held and either captured or created stars, and there's a ton of stars, and that's why the Milky Way is so bright, right? But this is the earlier stars, okay? And then as we move away from the center, we start to get to the later created stars. So from our perspective, it's sitting somewhere kind of in the middle, a little more towards the outside. But when we're looking at Orion and all those stars associated with it, we're looking at those later stars. We're looking at the later created stars, and where we would still be expanding as we create energy in the context of the galaxy. And then when we go to the galactic center, we start moving towards the center, we get to the older, which is the, you know, so the yin energy, the birthing of the galaxy. So this is a very important distinction, because we understand that, okay, everything that on that side of the chart that's dealing with Orion is more expansive, it's more yang, it's more about proactivity, it's more out in the physical world, speaking of things like, oh,
Can you
okay, there
see
we go.
this? I wanted to give
Yeah,
you a little
I
bit
thought I
of
lost you
visuals
guys.
while you're talking.
Okay, cool. So Orion more, yeah, I thought I lost you. Orion would be more yang, right? Because so that's more of like the tropical maybe kind of approach where it's like the more physical and that. But anyways, understanding Ophiuchus as a feminine archetype now really makes it very clear that we're talking about a very spiritual archetype. We're talking about an archetype that needs to go within. We see this reflected in a multitude of different ways. Like you said, the serpent is repeated, probably the most repeated symbol, I think, in ancient history across the entire world and all the cultures
every
in the entire
culture
world.
talks about it.
Yeah, and it's always interestingly associated with healing. And I think the reason is because what this part of the sky is if we think about, again, the galactic center, that's the key here, is that whenever planets are passing through that galactic center, we have this transformation, right? This is why Scorpio is associated with Pluto, right?
Yeah.
It's the death and the rebirth. And we see this as planets like, say, Venus just passed over the galactic center. So this happens every year. It's not a big deal, but it shows us what's happening to that planet's energy. And so Venus being the planet of values and relationships and enjoyments, we just went through a transformation of that like we do every year. When Venus passes over there, it's a death of the old values and it's the birth of the new one, for example.
Yeah.
So this now tells us that, okay, when we're talking about healing, we're talking about embodying more of that Ophiuchus energy. It's very important to allow for the yin, so to release, to clear, to allow for the death in order to allow for the new beginnings and the birthing of something new. Now, modern day psychology, like Jungian psychology in particular, shows us that in order to go from one state of consciousness to the next, we do have to be willing to dive deep into what Jung would call our shadows, right? We have to be willing to go into that unconscious world, into that yin world, into that center of the Milky Way, basically, in order to reconnect with and re-embrace with our shadow self, or all those parts of ourself that we've hidden away or exiled, that we're saying we're no longer, that are no longer us. And this is extremely important because I think that's what Ophiuchus is. I think Ophiuchus is the redeemer, is the way I like to think. Yes, it's healing, because healing is the effect of redemption. But if we look at modern day psychology and what we're learning, and again, the ancients saw this too, I think, is that in order to heal, we have to embrace the shadow or the exiled parts of ourself. And I think that's what the serpent symbolizes. It's the only creature on earth where its entire body rides on the earth, every part of it is connected to the earth.
Deeply, yes.
Yeah.
And then the shedding of the skin as well. And then again, keep a new journey, but it's still very connected to the earth. So I absolutely agree with you. Every single culture saw it as the deepest connection to survival, deep connection to the earth, even our own Kundalini energy rising through us. So did you want to have any?
No, I'm just so many things are rattling through my mind as I'm listening to you speak, Athen, and particularly around Ophiuchus, when we were looking at the software, we can see that really what it does is it the 13th sign condenses the sign of Scorpio to be quite small. It seems to extend the sign of Virgo to be really quite large. Right. But Ophiuchus is only quite small, and it centers, like you said, around the galactic center. And the reason it's of personal interest to me, because that's where I have my midheaven. My midheaven is actually aligned with the galactic center. So it's given me rise to think about all the things that you're saying and say, well, how does that shift my perspective? It's the only part of my astrology that would be in the Ophiuchus house, but also with us both having Scorpio as our sun signs and having a lot of energy there. Everything starts to shift round to Virgo, which is quite, as we said, quite a startling shift from being Scorpio to suddenly being Virgo. So I'm just throwing these into the mix maybe for the conversation to take a slightly more expansive view of how these changes in our natal charts with the 13th sign and with the sidereal are going to potentially change our view of ourselves, of our personality, which of course can't quite be true because we already are these things. So I'm wondering, how do we start to address these issues in relation to what you've just said? Because for me personally, listening to what you said about Ophiuchus and the galactic center and the redeemer and the effect of redemption, that really sums up the journey I've been on with my astrology and cosmology for the last several years, and understanding probably a bit like yourself with deep meditation, lots of inner work, taking myself apart and seeing, well, how does my astrology reflect my personality and my behavior, both inwards and outwards? So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on those ideas.
Yeah, and that's the extreme gap in true sidereal is the one between Virgo and Scorpio, and that's because Virgo, for those that don't know, is a very large constellation when we look at it visually. And again, I think it's something that our ancestors intended on because they saw the patterns. They knew when something entered into a certain part of the sky, things were reflected. There's nothing like you look at Virgo and you're like, oh, that's definitely like a woman or a person. It could be anything. Like all these constellations, like why is Leo line? They give them these attributes as symbols, as archetypes for what that part of the sky represents. And so there's a reason that that was all attributed to Virgo. But yeah, it's very large. The reason Scorpio and Ophiuchus are much smaller is because, like I said, they're sharing the same part of the sky as well. And so what we're seeing is like first it's Scorpio and then it's Ophiuchus is only because Scorpio wraps above the ecliptic first, and then the leg of Ophiuchus comes after. And then so if you use the midpoints, they're given about the same number of degrees, which is also interesting. But anyways, Scorpio being small, Libra being very small as well gives that huge gap. So in situations, and even in regular situations, you're almost always going to be the sign before in true sidereal. So if you're like an Aquarius, then you're very likely to be a Sun in Capricorn. And the signs next to each other are extremely different because in the cycle of astrology, you go from yin to yang, and that oscillates. And so neighboring signs always have an opposite polarity, and they're very different from one another. I mean, think about how different Pisces is from Aries, for example, right? But so Virgo actually has a lot more in common with Scorpio than Libra has in common with Scorpio, or that Libra has in common with Virgo, because they're both yin energy. They're both feminine. So Virgo, but Virgo, the maiden in this case, is about improvement, refinements, and earth energy. And then, Scorpio is about the deep dive and the water energies, the emotional and spiritual energies. So in situations like that, but in all situations, really, there is going to be that cognitive dissonance. There's going to be that separation. And what I would say with this is that, again, the way I like to view it is you're looking at a different facet of the self, because the truth is we are, all of us are actually the full zodiac. We're all 13 signs, right? And if we were really, let's say we're not because we're physically here, but if we were, say, fully embodying our true selves, the shadow and everything, as Jung would describe it, we're fully individuated, we would be operating in the center of the wheel. We wouldn't be skewed. We wouldn't be leaned. We wouldn't be overemphasizing one particular sign over the other. We would be perfectly balanced in the middle of the chart with all of them. And I think that's something to strive towards anyways. And recognizing that your true self, whoever's listening to this, your true self is the entire zodiac. And that it's really a matter of embodying all 13 signs in a healthy and balanced way. Now, if your tropical chart is suggesting certain signs are more dominant, well, that means, like we said earlier, you're probably going to have a lot of physical experiences, karmic experiences to resolve that, or to find balance with that, or to individuate that part of the soul. And in the true sidereal chart, you're going to have those particular signs be emphasized for your soul to grow and develop in this life as well. So I think the key here is, first of all, just do what resonates. There's no right or wrong. Whatever system's resonating for you at the time, go with that, because there's a very good reason it's resonating for you. But at the end of the day, we are the whole zodiac, and I think it's all about operating in the center of the chart as much as we can.
I agree. We're the whole zodiac, and I think this is what we're being called to do. Integrate the number 13. The hidden 13 is being hidden for too long. And I think it's the one that connects us to creation, to that source, to life source energy directly from the center of the galaxy. And we are receiving so much more light at the moment that we need to be able to receive, be receptive, and understand, have that awareness. And I know that there are more constellations. There are some people use 48, 88 constellations. We are the cosmos. But for the container that makes sense, I think 13 is more logical and is more connected to the Fibonacci sequence, which is the golden mean ratio, And it's more connected to the organic cycles that we have, the 13 moons, and 13 is part of our lives, of our bodies even. So I think this is why we want to bring that conversation forward. More people want to realize we are much more than 12, and we are much more than just the zodiac as well. We are the cosmos anyway.
Right, and as we said earlier in the conversation, Athen, you know, what we're understanding within ourselves, what's happening with our own community, especially over the last couple of years, is that we're all being forced to reassess, particularly those of us who are on a more awakened journey. We can say, being forced to reassess, how is the world around us? How is our reality? Is it coherent? Is it incoherent? And if it's incoherent, why? Is it a reflection of what's going on within me? Or have we passed over a threshold where what was the old paradigm, maybe tropical astrology worked really well with the old paradigm, what some might call the matrix or the system? And are we about to go through a shift? Because we know that from the precessional cycle that the Earth is also on a tilt, which interestingly at the angular connotation is actually pretty much the same angle shift that we see with the sidereal and the tropical astrology. So we're also thinking about this as like, well, when the Earth got tilted and knocked off its natural axis, was this also part of the process that then created the more tropical astrology? So we're investigating all of these things as we sense an incoming energetic pole shift, we can say, maybe a physical one down the road, maybe it's already happened. There are many ideas out there, but until we have really concrete evidence of these things, we're on an investigative process. And I think this is where this kind of dialogue and contemplation, both inwards and outwards, of like, well, what works? Does it resonate? And we always say to our community, you know, just take whatever we say that resonates, or whatever resonates from all of the things you're working with, because in the end, truth is a very personal experience. And do you have a comment about that in terms of how you see the shift of the ages at this moment in time, the process that humanity is going through collectively?
I want to add the Pluto question. So how do you see the shift of Pluto into Aquarius in the traditional astrology? How does it reflect in this astrology? And what do you say with that?
Seems the two things are intrinsically linked, actually.
Yeah. So yeah, I do view it that way. I do, again, not to bash tropical or anything, but I do see it as a stepping stone. That is how I see it. And I think that the tropical system will always have its use and will always have its accuracy. Again, especially when we're wanting to know more about the physical world and the physical experiences that we're having. But when we talk about like evolving the soul or evolving collectively or individuating, you know, the process always starts with starting with the more physical self, and then starting to innovate deeper and deeper into the unconscious, right? So it would make sense then that we start with tropical, something that's very physical, and then we start to move into other modalities, sidereal, whatever, even ones that we wouldn't even know yet, or ones that we're still discovering, like you said, but that take us more and more into that soul level or unconscious level or spiritual level, however you see that. And I do believe that's going to be the future. I do believe that's the trend. Again, I think we'll always use tropical, but I think there will be more and more people using this true sidereal. As we're seeing, the trend is just rising. And that, of course, goes for all industries right now in the world. What we're seeing, I think that's what you guys are talking about, in the sense of like, it's just happening collectively, like in every facet of life, really, globally at the moment. But speaking of then, you know, the Pluto, you know, we've got Pluto. So this just happens to be that Pluto is entering Aquarius in tropical, and just so happens to be also entering Capricorn at the same time in true sidereal. Okay, so this usually wouldn't coincide like this. It's one of the rare circumstances where it does. This is obviously a big shift in both systems, let's say, but it's a big shift collectively for everybody. So we've heard, probably most of us, Pluto going into Aquarius. We're thinking of it more in terms of transformations to the Aquarius energy. So transformations to the world, literally, and community and innovation and technology and all this kind of stuff. From the true sidereal perspective, what we're reading this as a transformation to the systems and structures themselves. So in order to, of course, understand cycles, like we've been saying, we have to look at, in this case, past cycles. When was the last time Pluto was entering Capricorn in true sidereal? And this was, as many know, when it was the birth of the United States. We're having what's called the Pluto return, which means that Pluto's where Pluto was for the United States when it was born. And so it's the very similar energy. So this is the late 1700s. This is when, so I'm giving you the true sidereal perspective. So This is when the whole world shifted from monarchy to more kingdoms, this kind of more centralized form of governance, and also more mercantilism and centralized forms of finance as well. And religion, of course, as we saw, being much more centralized. So that was the systems and structures for the time. But what we saw within 20 years, which is the amount of time that it took Pluto to pass through Capricorn, is we saw extreme changes to these transformations and to these systems and structures, excuse me. And so we saw it politically. We went from monarchy to much more democratic, republic forms of governance. We saw more towards the free market. And of course, we saw the really complete transformation of the religious institutions at the time. So that's what we're expecting now. We're expecting this to repeat. This isn't to say we're going to go through wars or anything like that, but we're already seeing it now. There's going to be major transformations and changes over just the next 20 years to the point which will be very similar to what we saw in the late 1700s, that countries like the US are radically different from what they were prior. Countries in Europe, and of course, even in the East, we're going to see probably many monarchies probably stop. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe the UK gets rid of its monarchy, or in the Middle East as well. We're going to see transformations.
European countries too,
all over, So major changes politically. We're seeing it financially as well, new financial institutions, and probably also with modern day religion. I won't get too much into that, but we have our modern day religions, right? So anyway, so that's what we're experiencing. And so, but we're reading it from more of the sense of the systems and structures, that we built in society.
So you would think that there will be new structures, and I agree, there will be new structures, new systems, more modern, but I do see a fusion of what it is going into Aquarius, which is for more inclusive to the people and the community, or the communities around the world. But at the same time with new systems. So it's like a combination of both. Of Pluto in Aquarius, we'll experience it more 3D, and a move of Pluto into Capricorn with a whole new set of systems that are for the highest good of all. That is what I'm hoping for anyway.
And maybe if I can just add a thought there too, Athen, for consideration, there might be some of us who think, oh my God, we just did Pluto in Capricorn, and look how the last 4 years, where do we have to do it again? So I could understand some trepidation about that, but I was sat contemplating all the things that we've been talking about today for a while over the last couple of weeks, and thinking, well, how would it be to rerun going through Pluto and Capricorn, but without the top-down hierarchy, without that kind of control mechanism, and thinking of the higher notes of Capricorn, maybe of mastery at the internal level, and seeing perhaps if the transition of Pluto through Capricorn again with this perspective, whilst Pluto is transiting through Aquarius in the 3D, might give us a different mechanism with which to work with Pluto in both the physical and the metaphysical. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation to see whether you have a perspective on that, whether it adds to the picture, or whether it's just a confusion.
No, I mean, so that would be more through the spiritual lens, right? But I still think that Capricorn is very physical, right? I mean, it is the earth energy. It is about the systems and structures. It's Saturn energy. So, I'm already seeing it now, and I've looked at these trends, and I do believe we're going to see it physically. We're going to see these actual changes to the systems and structures. But as with every sign, I totally agree that we should be looking at it from that higher perspective. And on a personal development level, yes, all of us are going to be stepping into a new sense of power, of mastery, let's say, reclaiming our power with what we can achieve within ourselves on a spiritual journey, of course, also productively and everything else that's external with Capricorn, but really reclaiming that sense of mastery, reclaiming that sense of maturity, reclaiming that sense of responsibility, perseverance, all these healthy qualities of Capricorn in terms of these inner qualities of us. Absolutely. That is definitely going through transformation. And I think we'll see that collectively as well. Yeah, there's no doubt about it.
So is your prediction a rebirth for the US then as well? Because we're definitely betting on it.
No, I mean, I think that's what I've been talking about. I've been talking about this for like 2 years, and I didn't think it would like unfold this way. I personally, I didn't say this like publicly or anything, but I personally thought that it would actually be a little bit more of a push, like maybe even a little having to be a little bit more, not violent, because I think we've moved past that, but I thought it was going to be something more like a tension, like more of a cataclysmic physical kind of experience. But it seems like actually, and we'll see, because it's only started. Pluto has just entered
Yeah.
Capricorn in
Yeah.
true sidereal, right? So maybe I'm, speaking a little
Yeah.
too soon here. Yeah, no, at this point so far, it actually seems to be very peaceful, and much more of a smooth transition than I thought it would be.
Well, in Mayan cosmology, we're still in the year of the storm. So we're going to continue to have a storm until July of next year. So there is still room for like adjustments. And what the storm does is it catalyzes, any process that needs to happen.
Yeah.
So we have a few months, and definitely this shift of Pluto is going to show us the new direction.
So yeah, I just wanted to also put into mix something that I alluded to earlier, which is sort of in response to what you just said, Athen. For a long time, I think during 2020 and 21, I also had very much the same external view, is that this was going to be tough. It was going to kick off. There was probably going to be lots of aggressive situations, both at the national level or at the personal level. But what I've seen this year through collective attention and intention is that perhaps in the more human emotional realms, what we might call the astrals or the 4D, that there has been a huge cleanup job, and there has been a lot of assistance from off planet, not necessarily fully revealing itself into what we would call the physical realm, but for those of us who are sensitive or have those links or have more connection to our star selves, it's certainly been very palpable for me. And I'm like, well, sometimes I think there is a sense that we feel like we need to go through that situation in the 3D to feel like we did something. And yet the truth is we already did it. I think we did it over the last 4 years. And, when I was meditating and conversing with some of these beings, they were like, well, don't you think you've suffered enough? All of you, Davyd, it's, how much suffering do you feel like you need to go to until you feel like you've come to that place of redemption, like you said earlier? And I sat with that for quite a while. And I was like, you know what? I think we have all suffered enough, and there's still a fair amount of suffering that's probably going to come through revelation. But when I tune into the energetics of the space right now, I don't see the need or even really the potentiality for that level of aggression. It seems to have already been dealt with, which is, I think, really good. But at the same time, there's also a kind of a consensus within the wider spiritual space that the collective needs to go through some kind of stark or jarring 3D experience to snap them out of the reverie that they're in. And so I think that's kind of taking a pulse on it where I feel we are right now. But I'd love to hear your response in regard to the physical and the metaphysical in this moment, and in relation to what you just said.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, so the way I see it is we're kind of like spiraling, right? It's like we look at the chart and I look at this thing and it's two-dimensional. And it looks like we're just going around and around and but the truth is like if you look at, for example, the solar system, like the sun itself is flying through space, orbiting around the galactic center. And so the planets are not like in this 2D plane that we were taught in school. They're actually spiraling through space, orbiting, spiraling around the sun as it flies through space. And this is very important because what it's suggesting is that when we're going through the chart, whether it's every month with the moon or once every 250 years with a Pluto cycle, we are never going back to that same place. We are evolving, and each time we return to the seemingly same place, we're doing so from a higher state of consciousness or a more evolved state of being because of the previous cycles that were involved. So that's why like things like the Pluto return and stuff like this, I think are happening much more peacefully than they did 250 years ago, right? We've developed a lot that 250 years, or in short term, 4 years or whatever the cycle we're looking at is, but we're never having to go back to, I mean, sometimes there's lessons to relearn, but again, it's never the exact same lesson. It's always something that we've now evolved. We've learned something new experientially, and we're taking that with us into each new experience to make sure that each experience is evolving from the prior. And I think that's why humanity has grown so much. I think that's why the trend has been more and more towards freedom for humanity as a whole, more and more towards peace and prosperity. I mean, we'll have our downs. There's always retracements and things like this. There are waves, but overall in the largest cycles, yeah, we're obviously in that trend of life. I mean, life itself, look at it, it's crazy. Like, what are we doing here? And how did this happen to Earth? You know, it's growing. And, you know, we're going to continue to do that. And the trend is still pro-life and still expanding in that direction and becoming less and less hardship, less and less suffering, less and less physical challenges as we evolve into what you might call higher states of being, higher states of consciousness, or as some might say, literally into higher dimensions.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that because of the bigger cycles that we also track with the Mayan cosmology, we have completed the galactic night. And so the cycle now, since we switched since 2012, we're now in the new cycle, which is the galactic day. So we are in that transition. Therefore, what happened 200 years ago would have happened during the galactic night, when we were not receiving all of the light from the center of the galaxy. So it was a completely different experience where we needed to experience more shadow, more darkness, more contrast. So that now that we're going into a more awakened space with more photons coming from the center of the galaxy, we get to decide, do you want more of that? That you saw the contrast, now what do you want? So I think our role is super important because we have experienced this transition of being in the galactic night and now walking the humanity into the galactic day.
Right, and as Bellis is saying that, Athen, you know, what's occurring to me is that maybe this is the time where the 13th sign, and particularly sidereal astrology, is really going to expand rapidly because of the connection to the galactic center, the fact that Ophiuchus is right in that part of the zodiac, and perhaps this is where we get to reveal the hidden part of ourselves, the more serpent-orientated heart, the shedding of the skin, even connections to our DNA, all of which is being affected by the light streaming onto the planet from the photon belt, and of course, with all of the other activity of El Sol, our sun, who is also giving us so much light at this time and forcing us inwards to resolve the density that we've been carrying as part of the experience here in this 3D world during the age of the darkness. And as we shift, it seems to me that this conversation is very on point as part of that shift.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, and I think there's more and more conversations like this happening every day, thank goodness. And that's going to continue. And people like you, I love what you guys are doing. And yeah, it's just the truth, you know, and we're just discovering things. And that's the fun of it, right? It's really a self-discovery process. It's a personal discovery process, but as we're pointing out, it's also a collective one as well. And this is the fun of it, you know. It's not easy, but it is
that is the key. Keep it fun. Keep it fun
if you can.
So thank you so much, Athen, for coming to our show and sharing some of your wisdom and experience. I'm sure people are going to love this. Do you want to share a little bit about your platform, what you do, what you can offer to people?
Yeah, so it's masteringthezodiac.com, or you can just Google Mastering the Zodiac. And there we have a birth chart calculator where you can just type in your birth details. You don't need your time of birth if you don't have it. It would be best if you did, but just type in your birth details and you will see the sky when you were born. So we have it in astrological chart form, but we also have it in a sky view form like a planetarium. And so you can see it visually, you can verify it with other planetariums, but it is essentially where everything was when you were born. So just start there, see if it resonates with you. Like I said, it might not, and that's fine, but it's there for you if you want to. And I do invite everyone to at least go check it out, see if it resonates. And there's even a little mini report you can read about yourself. It's got the sun, moon, and ascendant for your true sidereal signs. See if that's helpful. And if it is, I'd like to give a discount to your audience for the report. If you'd like the full report, 50% discount if you go to masteringthezodiac.com/report-discount. That's report-discount. I can send you guys the link.
Yes, we'll put it in the notes if you want.
Absolutely. And are you open for personal readings if people want to dive deeper into the sidereal chart, Athen?
Yep. So we've got one-on-one sessions, recorded readings if you just want me to say what I have to see in your chart, and a recording, live sessions through Zoom. We've got courses as well, one-on-one courses, video courses, bunch of free reading materials, pretty much anything you could think of astrologically. We've done our best to put on the website.
Brilliant.
Cool. And I guess maybe as a final question, more in a fun direction, because we have a lot of Scorpio energy in our tribe, lots of people with strong Scorpio placements, and we've all been sat contemplating what it would be to be like suddenly Virgo, which is not necessarily a natural switch for us Scorpios to think about internally. So on a more fun note, do you have any hints and tips for a lot of our audience who might have those like inner concerns about, well, yeah, especially me perhaps. And I'm just having fun with this because it could apply to any part of the zodiac, but this is the nature of a lot of our community tends to have this kind of energy, and because Virgo is so big, suddenly everyone in our family is Virgo, which is a little concerning.
So I got like a dry humor. If you're a Scorpio, you love truth, right? So go look at the true sky. Go use the true sky. That's all I've got.
Ouch! Back at you, bro. You know what? That's, you know, we like to have fun with whatever we're doing here, Athen, and you know, it's part of the inwards journey is to be able to laugh at ourselves. And as one of my profound teachers said many years ago, he said the thing that we have in the light that the darkness doesn't have is that we can laugh at ourselves and that we have humor. So even in those more challenging moments, perhaps when we're thinking about shifting zodiac signs, we can go and have fun with ourselves and poke around. And the truth is, you know, from my own perspective, I have my descendant in Virgo, conjunct Ceres, and a bunch of other stuff. So my inner world is already quite Virgo. So I already know that energy, and I'm just playing with this as a way of testing how I feel about it. But I guess it's a question that we're all going to go through, because if we decide to switch systems or use both systems, it's going to require some level of mental dexterity, but also physical and energetic dexterity to be able to hold both in the same way that we've been learning to work with the mind, time technology, and Western astrology. And we found that the two are compatible, but it does require some mental flexibility to be able to hold those different systems simultaneously.
It's about being able to work with your multidimensional self as well.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to the Virgo energy as well, because that connected to the goddess energy, to the earth, to the plants, to everything that we talk about. So somehow we've always been Virgos.
Right, exactly. I mean, we love plants, so that's a lot of what we do is working with plant intelligence of all different types and varieties. And I think also what really maybe as a final thought Athen drew us to this system, to your work and everything we've been talking about today, is actually the sense of an ending with Venice. It's like, I think I've lived that astrology really, really strongly for this part of my life, and some part of me is ready for a change, a transition, a shedding of the skin. And it's just so interesting that this is what the 13th sign is all about. So maybe as a final note before we wrap up today, do you have anything that you'd like to share around that as how you see things moving forward?
No, I mean, I totally agree. 13 is that number that's been removed, probably for good reason. I mean, this is the key. It's the missing link. We have to, again, kind of redeem, you know, the full self. Again, we fractured ourselves. If you go, you know, to something really deep and esoteric, you could think that maybe we are having an experience now that is very limited to what our true selves, you know, can experience. And so we're having this very simple experience, but, you know, seeing that the key to reconnecting with our true self has to be a death and a rebirth. It has to be willing to let go parts of the self, willing to let go some of these signs, willing to let go some of these identifications and associations in order to reunite with ourselves. And I think that's exactly what the 13th sign is about. And the Galactic Center is about the death and rebirth, or which you could say the redemption, you know, of what I'm calling the whole zodiac, but it's really just all parts of the fragmented self, you know. And I think that's really what we're on the journey of, you know, collectively.
Okay, so I'm going to close with the Mayan cosmology, where the aim, the absolute aim, is to remove all identities and to realize that I am another yourself. We are in the wave spell of the mirror. Today is a day of collaboration, and it's great to have this collaboration with you. And like we do say to everybody, in Lakesh, I am another you, and we are all mirrors of each other. So we're doing all of this together. Thank you so much, Athen. Lovely to have you.
Thank you, guys.
Hope you come back.
I will.
Thank you so much,
it was
brother.
A pleasure.
It's been really a joy to connect, and I hope we can maybe do this again in other formats and start maybe developing the conversation, because it's fascinating, and we know that we're in this place right now. We feel that there is a lot of other people who are wanting to make more sense, to be more cosmic, to be more connected, to have more of their DNA activated. And you know, if we want to be really in tune with our cosmological selves, then we should be looking at the stars. We want to be activating the star part of us, but also at the same time not losing sight of the fact that we came here to be grounded on the earth plane in the 3D, and how to balance both. How can we be cosmological beings having a human physical experience. And I think this is a very, very exciting time. So thank you again, brother, for joining us today. We'll put all of the links in the show notes. And yeah, we hope to be able to do this again very soon. So thank you very much for joining us.
Gracias.
Me too. Thank you, guys.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.
Ciao.